To those joining us remotely, thanks for being there. Those in the room, welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to get to quick wins with data. This is effectively the trade secrets of Emperitas and how we have figured out how to do our data management. Quick introductions, I'm Luciano Pesci. I'm the Director of Research at the Utah Community Research Group at the University of Utah and the CEO of Emperitas. And this is the second lecture in our Dawn of the Data Age lecture series. This time we're going to be covering how to use data, how to get to quick wins with data. So there's three goals for the lecture today, and it's broken out into these three sections. First, teach you how to set reachable data project goals. So I'm going to walk through the SMART goal system that we use, and then there's a couple additional pieces that we add on to that process. The next is to explain how we successfully roadmap data projects, and keys to things like visibility and merit. And then the third is a basic outline for an overall effective project management. This is project management. And whether it's data or something else, there are some core tenets to project management that are going to be very helpful that we'll cover in the context of data today. So SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. This is not my method. If you go online, you will find 100 different definitions of SMART goals. What the different letters stand for change. I have adapted it specifically to data. But the point of this is that the first step is the most important. Okay? And change is always scary to people. So a quick side note on change as you approach this. It is very likely that if you're watching this or you're joining us that you are not currently getting to quick wins with data, or you're not getting to them as quickly as you'd hoped, or the wins aren't as big as you'd hoped. And that means that you're probably going to have to change some underlying things about the processes that are involved, and you should know going into that people fear change. Knowing that, you can take a role and provide guidance that makes it, the probability of success a little higher, but people don't fear change, and unfortunately, it is going to be a prerequisite to getting any of these quick wins with data. So I just briefly mentioned that the first step is the most important. Most of what we're covering today would be considered the very first step. In fact, in 80% of the project work is going to be done mechanically, or I should say 80% of the work of any project is the actual mechanical processes of going out and collecting a survey, finding a data set, cleaning that data set, processing it, visualizing, interpreting it. That's by far the majority of the actual workload. That is not what we're covering today. The majority of what we're covering today is making sure that the project is on the right footing from the beginning. You can think of it as an analogy of like shooting an arrow. The further you need to shoot, the worse it is for you if you're just slightly off. And part of what we're going to cover today is why you shouldn't be shooting past 60 days, that you really should be trying to think about 60 days and then divide that into 2-week sprints within it. But if you don't have the proper goals from the very beginning, the likelihood of success of the project is pretty low. So how do you organize this? Well, I said you're going to have to be the ambassador, the one who brings people in. I recommend you use food. It is a perfect lure for humans. It breaks down barriers. It allows people to relax. Because you do need, in this early stage planning, you really do need open, honest feedback. You need it about what people don't know. They may be hesitant to share that.
Share your screen.
Did I lose it?
Yeah.
We lost the screen. Stand by, everybody. Screen went away. Got it again?
Got it.
All right. Thanks for letting me know about that. So, I hope that bar is not going to be, it's going to be down there the whole time. Nothing we can do about it. Okay. Let me go back. What's happening here? All right. So, hosting a kickoff meeting with all the stakeholders and using food as the bait to bring somebody in. You're still not seeing it, huh? Let's try this. try this 1 more time. Let's 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 try this 1 more time Well, the problem is when I'm jumping out of full screen, but let me just do this, and you will now unfortunately still see my little thing down here, but I'll try to move it off to the side as much as possible. Okay, and I need to go back.
Only you see that.
Still?
But we're good for the.
Okay.
No, you can't. Yeah.
So back to the kickoff meeting, which will be difficult sometimes, like this initial meeting right now. You will have technical problems. The bigger problem is that you're going to have people who need to be honest, who may have been conditioned to either not giving full disclosure, intentionally hiding things. This is a potentially vulnerable moment for people. So again, knowing that going into it, you can create an environment where people feel safe and encouraged to participate. This only works if everybody participates, because otherwise you get to the end of the project and some stakeholder brings up that information wasn't as actionable as they had hoped, or wasn't actually what they needed to know. This is the time to figure that out. So if you have all those stakeholders in one room and you've got food to bind them, and you structure a conversation around the SMART goals, and we'll lay out what those specifically are, you should be able to get the information that you'll need to at least deliver exactly what was asked of you, which is the first problem you have to tackle with data. What do people need to know? Why do they need to know it? How are they going to act on it? What's the actual data? Who controls that data? That will come out of this conversation. But use a framework. I hit on frameworks in the last lecture a lot. Frameworks are very important. One of those that you can use is the SMART goals. As I said earlier, for those who just joined us, I don't care if you use the SMART method. This is one of many methods. In fact, we've experimented with probably a dozen different methods. We've tried SWOT analysis. We've tried laddering. We've tried the 3-6-5. We've tried all of these different approaches, the Fuge method. It doesn't really matter which one you use. Figure out the one that's going to work for you and your team. The point is that you're using a system. You are approaching this systematically. You're not just sitting down and saying, oh, we need data. The worst thing that I've ever heard come out of an organization was someone say, we need data this afternoon. We don't know what that data is, and we don't really know what we're learning from it, but we need data by this afternoon. That's nonsensical. A system of approach like this, the SMART goals, helps you funnel what you actually need to get out of it. So the first piece is being specific. Ask this very question. What do we need to learn from the data? That's the goal. Also, I'll show you a spreadsheet where we organize this in a few slides. Every row is a goal. The goal is to learn something. What is it? What do you need to learn? The next is measurable. Well, what data can you use to learn about that goal, to achieve it, to get the information and achieve whatever that goal is, stated purpose is? The third is, what is a win? If it's going to be achievable, predefine this. This is where a lot of people, they get hesitant at this point to predefine a win. You're going to fail, and so you need to be flexible, but having something on the books that, hey, at this point in time, we believed that this represented a success using this data. That might change, but at least till that point, we have a guiding goal and a way of measuring whether or not we're going to actually achieve it. The fourth piece is being relevant. How will we use the data results to achieve our goal? And the fifth is timely. When is the data result needed? At what point does it expire? If you can't make a decision on that data because it shows up too late, then there's no point going after it. And that also means being realistic. If you say, oh, we need to know everything about our market in the next 2 weeks, you probably won't know everything about your market. You can learn some of your market in 2 weeks, but if you wanted to do traditional market research, look at competitors, look at market trends, do the bigger picture, there is a hard limit on how fast that work can actually be done. It's true with programming, it's true with data analysis. Put hard dates to when this information is needed. So I'm going to go through each of these one by one in a little bit more detail, and then I'll show you 2 pieces that we added onto the SMART method. So being specific, goals are what you want to learn from the data, and I'm giving you this in the context of data. So you can take the SMART approach and go apply it somewhere else with bigger goals, strategic goals, product development goals. I'm telling you that for the purpose of this presentation, since this is about data, when I'm using the word goal, I am specifically talking about what you wanted to learn from the data. Each goal should be single and narrowly defined. So you need to be aware of, they're called double-barreled goals. Well, we want to accomplish this and that. Well, unless those two things are highly, highly correlated, basically the same thing, that might not happen. You could accomplish one and not the other, and then that creates ambiguity. Did you reach your goal or not? So each goal should be a single specific thing, and that's for the purposes of measurement and testing. So here's a good example of a very narrowly defined goal. What's our customer lifetime value? We want to learn what our customer lifetime value is. Very clear, very simple. It's one thing, customer lifetime value. We can complicate it by saying, well, do we want monetary or non-monetary? The point is, our goal is to learn what is the customer lifetime value. That's clear enough for us to then make the next step, which is, okay, well, what data are we going to use? If our goal is to learn the customer lifetime value, then what data is available to us? Having everybody in the room, this is where the synchronicities of being in person come out. Someone will say, well, I've got this little bit of data that affects it. I've got finance data. And in that finance data, I've got all the invoices we've ever sent to client. And someone's like, great, but has that client ever recommended for us? Because if so, then they're more valuable. And then someone on the CX team is like, actually, we can measure that. We've got surveys on 50% of our customers, and we can figure out if they've ever recommended. Or we can look at their net promoter score and determine if they're likely to be a recommender, and we can give them a little bit more value as a result of that. This almost always involves multiple data sets. There are some things you can get, like I want to know the click-through rate of this specific software that we're using, that it's measuring. That's narrow enough that you might have one data set. But usually the interesting stuff you're trying to tackle in an organization requires multiple data sets, which is again why you need all the stakeholders who would be involved. So here's another example building on the customer lifetime value to put the measurable part of this process into your mind. So if we wanted to learn about the customer lifetime value, well, where would we need, what data would we need, where does it live? Two obvious sources would be something like the CRM, a Salesforce, or a HubSpot, or whatever customer relationship management software you're using, where you have information about the sale, what they purchased. Sometimes repeat purchases are being logged in that e-commerce. Usually your CRM actually contains a lot more than it will, maybe like a B2B, where once the sales team has actually closed on a deal, they're handed over to finance to do all the invoicing and paperwork, and things can change. They can add something on, they could remove something. So it might require that you use both Salesforce and something like QuickBooks to get a full picture of the customer lifetime value. But now we've identified what we want to learn and two places where we could get information that would help us. The next is predefining what is a win. And this is very important for accountability, because accountability can go wrong for one of two reasons. You can not hold someone accountable to a very clearly defined rule, and that's really detrimental. They learn very fast. I see this with students all the time, right? They just wait till the deadline, and they think that if they go over, they can get some sort of leniency from me, and then they're very, very upset when they discover that no, the rule was outlined very clearly ahead of time, and if I allow you to submit late this time, you'll submit late next time. That's one way that accountability can go wrong. The other is, I cannot tell you when something is due, and then I can just come to you and say, oh, you didn't get that done in time. And you're like, well, I didn't know that I needed to have it done by now. Or you may have finished it and I'm not satisfied, and they say, you didn't really accomplish what I wanted, so it's a failure. Predefining what will be seen as a success before the work begins is very important. This creates hard expectations, and we'll get into why this is so important for transparency and accountability in a few slides. So here's another example building on our customer lifetime value. A win would be knowing the average customer lifetime value. That's enough for us right now. If we went into the Salesforce data and we went into the QuickBooks data, we could learn the average, not the individual maybe, and it's definitely not going to take into consideration any non-monetary things, but we could learn the average customer lifetime value. And if we knew that, then this project would have been considered a win. This goal was won. The fourth step, make sure it is relevant. This is about ensuring usefulness. This is, of the two questions that I think are the most important to ask in the SMART goals during the kickoff with all the stakeholders, the two they kind of naturally flow. They don't fit into the SMART acronym well this way, but the way they naturally flow is what do you want to know and then what are you going to use it for? This relevant part is really important. If someone does not know how they're going to use the data, then you should put it as very low priority. And you can take this even a step further. It's implicit in this that if you know how you're going to use it, it's useful to the organization. But you can take this an even step further and say not only how is it going to be useful, but what revenue is going to actually be tied to it? What's the goal from this decision? What is the standard for this goal on revenue that we would want to make sure that it's useful? If it's not going to bring us in tens of thousands of dollars, maybe we shouldn't do it. If it brings us in millions of dollars, maybe we should do it. The point is you don't just go looking for information because it's interesting. You find the stuff you can act on, and that's where relevance comes in. So here's another example. Well, once we know the average customer lifetime value, we are going to use that to change our marketing across all channels. Right? If we figure out that there is a high customer lifetime value type, we look at the average and we say, okay, we know that it's, let's say that the average customer lifetime value baseline assessment is $50. Right? Then it is worth it to us up till $49.99 to acquire that client, to acquire that customer. And so we could go out and change our marketing strategy and say now our cost of acquisition metrics at these different stages has to total to $49, right? And at the early stage, we'll spend 19 of it. At the mid stage, we'll spend at 2 different levels 10 more of it, and so on and so forth. We will know that there is a clear use for that data once we know it, and that's been outlined. The fifth is timely, setting deadlines. This helps you in 2 ways beyond accountability. The first is that there is a deep temptation when you get into data analysis to just go do every single thing that you could. Every single crosstab you could run, every regression model you could build, every correlation table that you could run. You have to avoid that mission creep. Your goal is very clear. It's customer lifetime value. If you start to find things about cost of acquisition problems, for example, in the analysis, then that's a good time to say, a good point to say, look, I'm against the clock. I don't have time to go do that. The second place that this helps you is it keeps you from going too far down the rabbit hole on something like customer lifetime value. You may not be able to get to an individual level in 60 days or even in 2 weeks, but you could get to the average. Well, if you don't have a deadline, then you may spend months and months and months trying to get to a really deep version of the information that's not necessary initially. Okay, so due dates that are transparent and out there, and I'm going to show you some software that helps with this, keep people it helps people avoid those 2 very common problems with data work, right? Mission creep and just going way too deep. So here's another example building on our customer lifetime value for this timely part of the goals. So to change our marketing targets, we'll need the average customer lifetime value before October 1st. So if we don't actually have that value by then, we don't have time to roll out all of the changes that we would have to do in marketing to then actually deploy all of our new campaigns and hit maybe, for example, the Christmas season. Being clear about when data is no longer useful is very important to making sure the prioritization of these goals is done effectively. Okay. Now, SMART as a method is great, but it is incomplete for data work because there's 2 other things that are not clearly stated in that acronym that you need. And at this point, the acronym stops actually capturing it. There's no part to this next. I guess we could go responsibility. Each goal needs a directly responsible individual. Every one of these goals that's simple enough to be outlined as one item in this spreadsheet I'll show you that has clear information about what data you're going to use, how you're going to use those findings, what's the measure of a success, and when it is due, you now need to assign it to an individual. If it is everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And part of why you do this is so that you can also start to track who is doing too much. Some people in the organization will end up carrying too much of this project. You can see that very clearly when every part of this, every goal, is assigned to an individual. Now, that doesn't mean the person has to work totally alone on it. It just means that they're ultimately responsible. The buck stops with them when it comes to this goal. So one person, Tom is in charge of getting the average customer lifetime value. Tom may still need to work with our finance team. He may still need to work with our sales team. He may need to talk to IT to get access to data that's not easily accessible through the front end of those software tools. He may need to coordinate with accounting to make sure that he's using GAAP accounting approaches. There's a bunch of other people Tom may need to work with, but Tom is responsible whether or not we get the average customer lifetime value by October 1st. And then the second part about the SMART goals is you're going to be listing lots and lots of things, and there's a trade-off to each of them. Some of them is you can get to them fast, some is that they're going to be more impactful. You can't avoid that trade-off, so you have to prioritize. And this is where if you've actually organized yourself effectively, then it's not very hard to prioritize these things. Due date is an important one. You're working against the clock, but the magnitude of the decision that's being made on that data is a big part of what should go into this calculation. Here's an example of that information. The simple process that we just went through ends up in 7 columns, basically in a spreadsheet. And I like using a spreadsheet because you can make it visible to everybody, especially if you're using something like Google Sheets or Box. You put it right there where everybody sees. Everybody knows what things are, what data is needed. So let's just go, let's pick our first example as the actual first row of this spreadsheet. What was the specific part of the goal? It's what we wanted to learn. It was our customer lifetime value. The measurable part, what's the data that we needed? QuickBooks and Salesforce. The achievable part, what is a win for this? Learning the average customer lifetime value. The relevance, how are we going to use it? We're going to change marketing targets. And when do we need it by? The 1st of October. Who is the directly responsible individual? In this case, it's me, Luciano. And what is the priority? It is the highest priority of these 5. This list can be very, very long. And if you're actually following true project management approaches, then this would be the parking lot. You could consider this the parking lot. This is where everything that you want goes into, it's prioritized, and then it actually has to be plugged into a functional system that goes and does the work. Because like I said, while this planning part was the most important, the majority of the work is the actual execution. SMART goals are so important because everything that follows is going to depend on them. Once you have those prioritized goals, the next step is to just map it out. And this is where visualization is really important. I am a huge, huge advocate of whiteboarding. I think I said in the last lecture, I may have said it in the live version, not the webinar, but humans process visual information 60,000 times faster than written text. And so anytime that you can be embracing visualizations, you should try. I think it's much easier to explain to people. It forces you to conceptualize and simplify what you're thinking. And so start with visualizations. This does not have to be a whiteboard, by the way. This can be paper exercises. So we did a product test focus group one time for a headphone company, and the headphones had a very unique feature, which is haptic feedback. They would vibrate at a certain low frequency. So it's not the kind of thing that you can be in a survey like, how did that feel? Right? They have to be there in the room to try them. And one of the things we did was just a visualization exercise. Put on the headphones and draw whatever comes to mind. And it was amazing to see people who are not artists. They didn't encourage them. It can be stick figures. It doesn't have to be great. I think you'll be shocked by the general ability of people to draw. I was always like, wow, that person's so much better at stick figures than I am. So impressed whenever I would see these drawings, but they're very telling. And then you ask, okay, now that you've drawn it, now explain it to me. And that step of forcing them to visualize first and then explain, you get very concise, on-point information. So use whiteboards, use paper, allow people to work on their own in their mind, and then share with everybody. And so whiteboards are a great way to do this. Oh, let me back up. You can also go see the 6-3-5 brain writing approach. This is probably one of the most popular currently in the brainstorming methods. A quick side note on brainstorming again, it's really important. This gets to biased information. If you're going to brainstorm, it's really important to not bias it ahead of time. You don't walk in and say, here's my idea, everyone write down what they think. Instead, it's here's a problem, everyone figure out their solution. Google does this where you get different colored postcards, post-it notes. Everybody gets a post-it note color. You write your ideas. You go up, you put them on the wall, you pick them out. The 6-3-5 method only works if you've got about 6 people, but you start with ideas and then you rotate them and the people add on to them. But the point is the successful ones all seem to have a common approach, which is allow people to express themselves first, unbiased, and then discuss it as a group. You are going to spend so much time outlining and mapping out this project if you're an effective project manager. And so you'll come to love it. You'll love it so deeply. And you'll love it so deeply that you'll be blind sometimes to its flaws. And you will look at evidence the first time that contradicts your belief that this is the right plan, and you'll dismiss it. And you might even do that the second time. And you might even do that the third time. And if you're not in a good place personally, or you're not in a system that allows for negative feedback to come forward, then that's probably as far as you'll ever get with the project. Okay. Plans are useless by themselves. The act of planning is necessary, but any one plan will not, famous saying, will not survive first contact with the enemy. You will have to change it. Build it that way from the beginning. This is partly why things are so visible, because then you can see when they aren't working and you have to address it. You might be right for the wrong reason. You might be wrong for the right reason. If you're constantly testing it because it's there in front of you, the plan will change over time and you will get to success. But the idea that you'll just map it out once, follow it blindly, and it will all work out, I hope I can dispel that for you. Here's another part. Do not plan past 60 days. If your problem requires a longer timeline than 60 days, then just break it into smaller pieces. It could be that all of 2018 is about getting to individual level customer lifetime value, right? We know for certainty what every single customer brings us in lifetime value, right? So the likelihood that they'll retain and not churn, the upselling that we'll do, the cross-selling that we'll do, the repeated purchases they'll do, the non-monetary value that they're deriving from it, the fact that they're recommending. That is a very large thing. It cannot be done in 60 days. What we can do, though, is say, well, in 60 days, we want to learn the average first. Then the next 60 days after that, we'll go into maybe segments, personas, sub-personas. Gantt charts are great for visualizing this kind of thing. Some software, and I'll talk about software here in a minute, some software that you use allows you to do rolling, so you can plan for more than 60 days, but you're only ever working on something for 60 days. And even within that, divide that 60-day timeline into 2-week sprints. Don't work to the quarter. That's my advice. Almost every organization that I see working on you can have quarterly goals. You should still be focused on the 60 days. What are we going to accomplish in the next 60 days? If that's broken into 2-week sprints, you will be very effective at either figuring out you're making no progress or making progress. You won't wait till day 45 to realize you've made no progress. So within that 60-day window, break it up. That's basically 4 sprints, 4 2-week sprints. Experiment with sprint length. Some people prefer to do every week. Some people prefer to do once a month. We have found that 2 weeks is pretty consistent, that you get pretty consistent output every 2 weeks, whereas 1 week can be super busy and the next week can be really slow. But those 2 weeks together on average are pretty predictable of what the next 2-week sprint will be like. But every one of these sprints should make progress. And if it can't be done in 2 weeks, you still need to break it down into further pieces. So think about the 60-day timeline into 2-week sprints, and this will help you make sure that the goals that you're trying to tackle are narrow enough. Oh, let me go back. There's one other thing I want to comment on here, which is and I did talk about this last month, but let's talk about it again, this idea that perfect is the enemy of better. One of the nice things about a 2-week sprint is you do see progress almost immediately. And so if you were waiting for an entire 60 days till it was perfect and there's no progress for the first 40 days and you don't realize that till the end, it's pretty much unlikely you're going to get there. It is far better to make small incremental progress than no progress at all. And this expectation of perfection usually paralyzes people and they just make no progress. And this gets to the idea of failing. Executing on the project itself, the actual mechanical work, like I said at the beginning, is about 80% of what you'll actually do. There will be a lot of failure involved. And another benefit of a 2-week sprint is you fail quickly, you learn quickly, and you pivot quickly. And that's really, this system that you build, whatever SMART goals approach you take, if you want to use SWOT or something else instead, that system itself has to be pretty resilient to failure. It can't have one little thing go wrong and the whole thing collapse. If that's the case, you're not building something that will survive. And knowing that ahead of time, creating an environment where failures can be openly discussed at things like stand-up meeting that we'll talk about here in a minute, is really important for success, because even people who are brilliant make mistakes. Even people who are hardworking make mistakes. Random chance happens. I've seen people hide the result of random chance. Something random goes wrong, and they're so worried that they'll get blamed that they just don't let anybody know. And then the problem becomes so much worse than it would have been to just solve, right when it went wrong. And so an environment where people can bring failures forward, because then in that environment there will be a correction and a new test, are really important. Now that doesn't mean you should just let somebody fail over and over and over and over again. If that's going on, either the system's broken or the management's not working or that individual's not suited for the goal that you gave them. But you'll see it because it's assigned to a directly responsible individual, and that individual has a measure of success, and you'll know, well, did Tom or Luciano get us the average value of customer lifetime value by October 1st? No. Why not? Well, accounting never gave us access to QuickBooks, so we were never able to get it. Well, we should have discovered that every 2 weeks for the 2 months so that we knew it was coming and we would have updated our due date. And this gets down to the project management aspect of this. If project management, which by the way is becoming a very in-demand skill that is paying quite a bit of money, and I would say that this is probably the next big, if data was probably the bubble term for the last 5-6 years as far as number of job searches and job postings and things people were talking about and way to make money, that really differentiated you quickly, I think project management might be the next one. And it's because it is so important in a world that has to move fast. And when you talk to software development companies that are doing software, where they're doing releases every week, every day in some cases, there's no room for coordination error. Right? You've got to figure out how to run it smoother, faster, more efficiently every single 2-week sprint, every single month, every quarter. And so project management is something that beyond this lecture you can learn a lot about in other places. Probably the best place to start would be software development, because there's so many competing schools of thought and methods that have emerged. You can look at things like Scrum and Waterfall and Agile and all these different approaches. But all of them still come down to, okay, you've got goals, now you have to go make it happen. We have found personally that transparency and accountability are far more deterministic in the overall success than any individual skill sets, any specific type of problem. You can have a highly skilled person tackling a very easy problem, and if there's no transparency and no accountability, it usually doesn't work out well. Radical transparency and radical candor are two concepts that have emerged, especially in the startup world in the last 5 years, around things like project management. that really seem to benefit not just the success of the team, but also of the individual person. I think most people actually want to be held to standards. I think most people in a work environment, I see this in school environment, I see this professionally just with other people I know. People they want that dopamine hit of completing a task, but especially successfully completing a task. And without any accountability, I think people just start to fall apart, even really disciplined people. I remember reading about John Adams, something in one of his letters to his wife. I remember coming across a long time ago about how guilty he would feel that for like 2 or 3 days at a time, he just like couldn't get out of bed. It wasn't because he was sad. It wasn't because he was hurt. It wasn't because he was ill. He just didn't want to. He just had no motivation and he couldn't make himself do it. And then he would say a deadline would show up, and all of a sudden, he was just motivated to go and he would conquer it fast, and he was a highly accomplished person. I know a lot of people, creative people especially, who are like that. So without that system of accountability and transparency where everyone else, including themselves, they can see into it, I think you'll have some people who might be great and might be skilled, but they just won't perform. And that's because the system doesn't support them in that way. But that requires very clear rules and very consistent, and by consistent I mean fair, enforcement. This is back to if someone does fail and you don't hold them accountable for it, that's just as bad. I personally believe the greatest aid for project management is the task management software. There are many different tools out there. Trello, Basecamp, Asana, S.M.A.R.T is one of our favorites. These are tools that allow you to outline projects, and they all approach it slightly differently. But the basic idea is you've got some project, you have goals, you know who's involved, you know the dates, you know a description of what needs to be done, you have connecting files to support it, and this becomes a central place where all that stuff can be pieced together. The level of complexity is one of the things that differs significantly across these software tools. The other is the way they lay them out. So some lay them out like you would maybe in your office if you keep like a goals board in your office where you're using, if we went down the hallway and I had my camera on, I could show you mine, where I have the different divisions within the company, and then I have on that board post-it notes with handwritten, send Johnny this updated sales deck, right? Make the slides for the Dawn of the Data Age lecture. And those are up there, and I have another area where they funnel through, so it's stuff I'll do 2 days from now, stuff I'll do tomorrow, stuff I need to do today. They're color-coded, and I can watch it all go through that. If you like that approach, there are some of these software tools that do it in that way. They do it with boards and cards, and I actually don't find that translates for me very well from the whiteboard to the task management software. I actually prefer within the task management software the hierarchical bullet point structured kind of approach, which I would say 80% of them are built on that framework. And then it comes down to, well, are they built for teams or are they built for individuals? That kind of changes. Are they built for internal teams or are they built for teams of internal plus a client external like an agency? So you have to try all of these and just find one that works, but having this as the central place, it gives you the transparency, the accountability, dates are in here, who it's assigned to is in here. It gives you visibility into the project, just like the Gantt chart. Some of them do have Gantt charts in them. You can lay out everything that's in the task management and visually see how it's going to play out over the next 60 days. So think about adopting a software tool to support this. Here's my advice, and this gets back to the people who fear change. If you're not already using this, it is going to be very, very hard to convince people on your team to adopt this. Most people do not like to change their methods, their approaches, the rhythms of their work, even if they know that there's going to be a benefit, a gain to it. Federal law is potentially mandating now that you do track hours, which has put a lot of fuel into people who are using this software. A lot of these will integrate with things like Harvest. You can see this one's S.M.A.R.T. If you look over here to the right, you can see that you can right there, there's my task, you start logging your time. The benefit to people to get them to buy into it, I mean, sometimes there's two things. You have to get everybody to do it or it will fall apart. Everyone has to start to use it, or someone will say, oh, I didn't have it in there and I didn't get it done in time, and then you need to come down on that person. You need to enforce that this is something we are all using for the purposes of trackability, visibility, accountability. That's one of the big issues. The second is that people will use it differently, and so you have to create some sort of standardization. So this is not something you just sign up for and then you give everybody a login and hope it works. As the manager of this project, it may even require that you, as the first phase, this is what we did. We discovered that this is what it took. We would have the mid-level managers who were running all the projects, who were running multiple projects, build out initially all the information into the task management. They would do this after the stand-up meeting, which we'll get to in a moment. And they would put all this information in and assign it to people and put the dates that everybody had agreed upon. And so we solved half the problem of people didn't know how to put information in or weren't going to put information in the same way. And by specializing that to one person, that solved the problem. People were now at least looking to see that they had tasks and they were checking them off. And so it could be that you just need to specialize a little more. And then over time they realize, well, I don't want to go through Cameron every time that I need a task added, and they start to add them themselves and they already see how things are working, and either everybody adopts this or no one will adopt this, is the advice. And then we get to the idea of constant verification. You will kill any project by micromanaging. And I think the fact that for those who are joining us in person and online, that you're even here probably means you're not a micromanager. Because how would you have time to be here if you were out micromanaging all the 50 people within your domain? But people also need that accountability. And so a daily, in some cases, some people do this daily where they have a stand-up every morning. This is called a stand-up because everyone is standing. This is not a long meeting. It is supposed to be 5, 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes it's done in sub-teams, and then the leaders of those teams then have their own stand-up following it. But the point is, everybody comes together for one moment, whether it's daily or bi-weekly, and says, this is what I've been working on. This is what I'm doing next. And if they have a problem, here's the problem I'm facing. Two things will come out of this. You will be alerted to what's going on, and someone else in the stand-up may have faced something similarly or might have a suggestion, and there's a quick moment of exchange of, well, I might even be able to help you with that. I can help you get the data out of accounting because I actually have a user login. So after the stand-up meeting, let's get together and fix this. That moment of coordination, of group coordination, is really critical to keeping momentum across the 60 days. You will get to the end of the 60 days and you will have a lot done if you have done these stand-up meetings because everybody knows what's going on. It goes back to the visibility. But the two things to get from it, right? An update of what's going on and identifying needs that are holding up progress. This meeting, by the way, is where you would have discovered that accounting has not shared the data for the third sprint in a row, which means we have now lost 6 weeks because of accounting data. Right, and then you can storm into accounting and with the thumb drive and demand the data. The final piece, and this is potentially controversial, so hear me out. Okay. The last piece in this is that if you've done this effectively, there should be some way to visually place what is going on where everyone can see it outside of software, outside of their own little tasks, outside of the spreadsheet. We have a physical board that hangs in a part of our office, and then some sub-offices, and we've seen this at other places, will have their own goals board. Sometimes they're very different, how they look. The point is there is a place where that visible accountability and the timelines and the progress are available to anybody who wants to know outside of the stand-up meeting every 2 weeks. Now, some people are really hesitant to do this. And if that's the case, it's usually because they're going to They don't want the visibility because they're worried about the sanction that comes from it. So either they're not being held accountable for stuff they should be, or they're not being held accountable fairly. This solves both of those problems. If it's very clear and it's been very detailed through those SMART processes, SMART goal steps that we went through, and you've got a very clear, directly responsible individual, you've prioritized things, and everyone's coming to stand up every 2 weeks and you know what's going on, then you put this up in a place where everyone can see. Sometimes it's just handwritten on a whiteboard. And everybody at a moment's notice knows the status of what's going on. There are some tech companies, even here in Utah in the Valley, who have these as like 60-inch monitors, 70-inch monitors that are hanging in different parts of the office, and it shows, how much code was written today, how many bugs were fixed yesterday, how much revenue came in from our one channel from mobile yesterday. It could be that high tech. It could be a piece of paper that says Tom got the CLV data, and everybody walks and looks at that. They don't have to wait till the next 2-week meeting to know that that's happened. This is also where people who are seeking merit-based progress in a company become very, very visible very, very fast. So you get to see who is just constantly making rapid progress on whatever problem that they've been tasked with, whatever goal they have. So while it's potentially hesitant, and I say that because here at Emperitas, since we're getting to the end, I'll ramble for a second here with a personal story. So we have an adult autism employee who is really good at very narrow tasks. And when we told him that we wanted to start tracking, his one key performance indicator was how many of these CRM records he had updated per day. His job was to do a lot of manual updating to the system. He did not want to do it. He didn't want to track it, and after talking with him about why, I got to the root, which was he was very nervous that he wouldn't be doing well enough and that we would fire him as a result of it. And I said, well, if you don't do your job, then unfortunately that's a reality that we would have to, but we're not going to arbitrarily fire you. Part of what we want to see is, are you making progress? Do you know if you make progress when you do this day to day? And he's like, no. So he started tracking it. The deal was that he would start tracking in his own personal notebook where he could control it for a while. And he'd show me that notebook. We'd talk about the notebook. And then it got to where every day he was just excitedly sending me text messages. Because when he started, it took him, I think, a couple hours to do the first one. He got in this rhythm where he was doing about 5 a day. Then it was about 5 an hour. And then I got an excited text message from him, and this is after we've been going for a few months, and he said, I did 25 in an hour. And I said, go back to your notebook and look at the first line, and what did it say? And he said, it says 3. I said, okay, do you feel good about the gain that you've made from 3 to 25? And so the personal value of reaching those goals, this gets back to why I believe people like goals if they can achieve them. It was very visible for him. And so a byproduct of that process has been that he as an individual has watched his own progress, and it actually empowers him to tackle new things that he was previously quite hesitant to do. So the only reason someone should fear this is if it really will be used arbitrarily against them. If that's not the case, then you have nothing but gain by putting one of these things up. So let's assume that you got through the SMART goal process, you mapped out the 60 days into 2-week sprints, you assigned directly responsible individuals, you've prioritized everything, and you get to the end of 60 days and you look back and you've all 5 of the things you wanted were done. You're not finished. There should be a new set of 5 things that you might be looking at. You might want to go back and test 2 of these now, change something, and go back and test it. Okay, well, we changed our marketing for the last quarter of the year based on this information. So come January 1, we're going to start collecting data again, and we're going to analyze customer lifetime value every 2 weeks for a few months and see what happens, see if it's climbing. Data is not usually a one-and-done process. And so be prepared in these goals to reach them, face new unknowns, or maybe even a specific unknown about the one that particular narrow definition of the goal, and have to go back through it. Testing and validating is well worth the time. especially if the decisions are very, very large. If there is a lot of money riding on a decision, testing and verifying in small batches before you just pull the trigger on a giant change is highly advised. If you're organized, the first time you do this, that kind of work should be easy. If you've already gone through the effort of getting data from accounting and you've already gotten the data from sales, for example, maybe you even could get access through the API and never have to go to them manually again. But once that's been done, it should be very easy for you to quickly get that data again, run the same models that you did before, the same descriptives, analysis that you did before, especially if you're using a programming language like R or Python instead of something like SPSS or Excel where you have to do it each time, every time. You could drop the same data, be updated data, but it'd be the same form of data into the same analysis script that you wrote, and out comes new information. So you should get very fast at repeating these processes. This is one of the signs that your system is actually working, is the ability to get an updated answer on a past goal very quickly. Watch out for people with a high truck factor. That's the other thing that you'll notice in this process. Okay, if this system is successful, it should survive the departure from the organization for any reason of any one individual. We call this the truck factor at Emperitas, so I've heard it as bus factor as well. But basically, the way to figure out a truck factor on somebody is, if Tom walked out of here and got hit by a truck, how bad is it for the company, for the project, and for these specific goals that he was assigned? If the truck factor is very high, then we know that we may have to work to make sure that Tom spreads some of his work around, spreads some of his expertise around, because one person suddenly leaving shouldn't sink the entire system. So, to go back over and conclude on what we've covered, how to set reachable project data goals using some sort of system, whether it's SMART, SWOT, any of these other 6-3-5 method. You need to set those goals, and they need to be very clear before you start anything. Once you have them, and you can answer at least the questions that I proposed earlier about what you need to learn, what data informs it, how you're going to use that, who's directly responsible, what's the timeline involved. You prioritize them, you map them out. You got 60-day window broken up into 2-week sprints, and then you start to manage. Maybe from a task management software, you put up your goals board, you start having stand-up. The point is, you don't just say, we want data by this afternoon, we don't know what it is, and we don't know what we'll do with it, but we need it. If you can avoid that, if you can narrow it down into small enough pieces, in 60 days you will get very, very useful information, and it will be far quicker than anything you've probably previously done. With that information, you can go test and validate, you can increase customer lifetime value, you can reduce cost of acquisition, you can develop new products and launch them, you can increase your user base, and you can do it using data the whole time. Now I hear it is a common, in fact, we just got done doing a survey internally of our own. We run an internship program here, and one of the things we'll do is we'll have interns do research for ourselves. So we just completed a survey of business professionals, and we asked them, what did they want to know about data? Well, first we asked if they felt empowered, and we were shocked by how many people said they did. Over 80% said they felt highly empowered by their data. They always ranked their organization higher than themselves, though, in all of these things. So we asked them about data cleaning and data security and data preparation, data analysis, data interpretation. And the one that seemed to span all professions, all roles within the company, and their self-declared level of expertise was they wanted to learn more about how to interpret data. And so because of that, next month, the same lecture series will continue. We will cover, that will be more of a tutorial lecture than probably the last two. I think I may even break out some screenshots of R, maybe even run R in the lecture itself to show you some things like why you need to identify variable type first, why you need to make sure that you have a measure of shape, center, and spread. And then once you have all those pieces and you're looking at something, what does the data actually say? It appears that that is a generally unknown thing, so next month we'll see if demand surges for this topic. But on the on the 19th, which I believe is a Tuesday, we will cover how to interpret data like a pro. Again, we'll just show you the methods that I teach at the U and that we use here at Emperitas,